First, let's consider the purpose of the main lesson book.
I feel that this broadens out to many questions because I really believe that teachers should be researchers. And I know that is often said in Waldorf education, but there is often not the time devoted to that. So it becomes for you then as a teacher to present yourself with a question that you live with for a year. And one of those questions can be, what is the purpose of a main lesson book? And if you have ever seen examples perhaps of main lesson books from Germany from the 1940s or early 50s, they do not resemble what we would call a main lesson book at all. They are very simple. They are simply capturing the material that was worked on. And so then the question arises, well, what's the purpose? Is it to be an artistic masterpiece? Is it to be what aspects of what you've taught is being captured? How much of what you do in a main lesson block? There is obviously, from what you have seen, there is no way that anyone could be capturing daily, the amount of work that you do in a class practicing. We're talking only math here, but you could extend this to any of your blocks. So we'll start with Rudolf Steiner saying that most people do not know the secret connection between the will and working in the proper way in childhood with drawing, painting, music, and other arts. We do so much good when the child has this opportunity. So there is this will aspect of their work, and the will being expressed through these various arts. And having the children train their will is something we talk about also quite a bit. What do we mean? We don't mean willful children. We mean, again, children who, working out of imagination, so this bringing something forth in their minds, then can make it real in the world. They can make it exist. That's the real will. So we can see then that even the purpose of the main lesson book in talking about will is going to be talking about how you structure your main lesson and how much time you devote to the bookwork portion of your lesson. So this one topic actually does overlap into other areas. We want the children to have a period of time during which they can immerse themselves, sink into their work. That's first grade on up. That is all the children at an appropriate level for their age. That there's an inverse ratio going on between the amount of time you're doing with physical movement activities in a circle in the early grades as opposed to what you would be doing in an 8th grade, and the length of time for bookwork in 1st grade significantly increases for 8th grade, where they could be working for an hour at a time. So if you have a 2-hour main lesson and you're working back in 8th grade and you want them to have an hour of bookwork, that gives you 1 hour for a review and new content and morning exercises of whatever nature you're working on, and transitions and things like that. So the same thing applies in the lower grades. If you work from the end of your lesson forward, how much time should the children be working? If your goal is, for instance, I want them to complete a page, so the pages are not super necessarily difficult, but you would want them working for half an hour, in 1st grade. 40 minutes perhaps, they could go longer. And then working back to structure your main lesson, because very often what happens is that people create morning circle activities that are 45 minutes long, and this presents another issue. Not only are you really taking that away from this essential will work at the end of the lesson, but you're also waking them up in a way that is going to hinder their ability to really bring forth what they learned from the previous day, your recall of the previous day's lesson. So there is a balance we're working toward here.
Next, we'll look at how main lesson books can reflect inner movement.
actually, anything that you're doing as you are involved in actually creating a main lesson book page, this outer activity is being echoed and reflected with an inner movement in your own being. And that is an important aspect. I think that movement is something that is vital to everything that we do, so that even when we are talking, what is moving between us are ideas. There is always a flow that is going on between people interacting verbally with singing. There's actual physical movement, but then there is this inner movement that occurs when you sit and listen, for instance, to music. If you sit and listen to a story, listen to poetry, there are movements that are happening within your being. The same is true working in a book. So Steiner has highlighted here all the arts, the importance of the arts in terms of the will. And this is this total engagement of yourself, giving yourself over to that art, whatever that could be, and that is an engagement of your will.
Let's think about what goes into a main lesson book.
How do we use our main lesson books? What would you say you want to capture in a book? If you have a math block, what would you put in? What would be the essential items to put in? What would you leave out? So one thing for us to note is that in a math, since we are in a math workshop, it's not your workbook. So very often, not in first grade, but in second grade on up, I would have little grid books or other things as well. So we had a number of formats. The little practice books, we would just practice things, but when it went into the main lesson book was really the essence of that lesson. What was the overarching rule or the one major example of the topic we were studying? We want to capture the essence of the main lesson content, the ability for a child to follow a teacher's work. So in first grade, second grade, you are generally leading them through all the pages. Third grade, I would have some pages led, but others not necessarily led. But you're leading them up toward the time where they're going to be designing their own pages. And in middle school, that should be happening quite a bit. You don't have to represent every activity that you do. However, one good thing for your planning, and that's why I do my own books, because in the summer, it helps me organize my thinking. I'm thinking through, what is the sequence of this topic? If I'm going to teach this topic, what is the first experience they have with it? Then what would be the next step that I'm building upon? And then where does that lead me further? So that flipping through a main lesson book, you should have a real good sense of the flow of the whole block, how they were introduced to lessons.
Next, we'll look at how we can represent concepts in multiple ways in order to build flexible thinking.
So looking at your main lesson book, the purpose of the main lesson book is also to give an opportunity to have a variety of representations for how you have worked with the material. So we know, and we've done a number of activities here that are showing different ways to do things. Could we take that 2s and 3s tables hand clapping? Could you think of an artistic way that the children could put that in their books without drawing a line of children?
Main lesson books can also be used to aid the teacher in teaching.
You're using the main lesson book also as an observation tool to what are this child's individual hindrances, obstacles, challenges. I made a commitment to myself to do every book. So I wrote every single composition that I was assigning to them. I did all the problems. I just wanted to have this experience of how long did it take me to do that assignment? What could I possibly expect they could do? I could almost use my own book as my notes in a way. So it was very helpful to do this. So the main lesson book can be something that is of purpose to the teachers as well. But if you're going through your class for the first time, this can be excessive work, so don't worry about it. Don't fret. I didn't do that my first time.
Main lesson books can also help students to review.
The main lesson book is their textbook, a self-generated textbook. And through the year, often I would pull things out. Let's go over. If we start a new block, we will go back to the work we did in the previous block. Let's see what we have done so far. In language arts, of course, any writing that you have done, you will be reading through all of that. And of course, building up then to the last week of school typically, where you are reviewing using your main lesson books. You can review the ideas. What do you remember from the first block? Well, let's look and see what we did. And going through to bring to life the amount of work they've done. Often children will say, oh my, look how I could draw at the beginning, the first day of the school year, and now look how well I can do this. They really see a progression of their own skill level, and that's always fun. That is fun to watch them do that.
Now to the question, what size should the main lesson book be?
Size of books, how complex main lesson books need to be. This is where I think is in the realm of teacher research, and it has to do with the culture in your school as well. To your question earlier about why do I have these different sized books, my experience was then when we got into certain blocks, that size was very unwieldy. It was not easy for them to write in. Kids would have to stand because the book was so long. They couldn't stay seated. It didn't feel right.
In general, US Waldorf schools use much larger main lesson books than are used by Waldorf schools in Europe. The next question is, how much artistic work should we do in our main lesson books?
There are times when the border can be just as important as the writing. If you're doing the Renaissance, for instance, some of those gorgeous Renaissance borders. There are times when the border really ought to be quite stunning. Form drawing when you're doing Celtic weaving in grade 4, you can do these incredible borders as well. Picking up motifs, if you're just studying geography, Africa, some of the incredible African patterns. So there are ways to use the border of the main lesson book to complement the topic. But what about a math block?
In the early grades, in general, the artistic emphasis is largely the same in each block. Then, as the students get older, the main lesson books have less of an emphasis than in the other lessons. As a general rule, the students should always be proud of their work. And now, how main lesson books help students to develop certain skills.
Every choice that we make for a main lesson book, you need to know what your skill or capacity you're trying to develop in the kids. And I think this sense, just as in first day of grade 1, what is straight and what is curved, this sense that I am writing horizontally, because we don't want them drawing crayon lines throughout their school education. We want them to get to the place where the lines can be left behind and they can see, they can sense this horizontal nature of the page and themselves in relation to it. So it's a place to build capacities and skills. You have to look at who the children are in your class. I had always a number of artists, and if I allowed them to start with a border, they would never ever get a composition written into the book, ever, because they would be gorgeous works of art. But that was a different kind of will work. They needed the will work of actually just lightly penciling, where their border was going to be, measuring it with their rulers, of course, and just indicating where their margins were, and then actually doing their content, focusing on transferring. And this is another thing that is very difficult for some children, and learning differences we can talk about, is the ability to track and copy from their page to their books. This is very difficult for some children. They get lost, their eyes. So what are the techniques that you would use? And we'll talk about that then. Techniques for keeping them able to follow their own writing. So from 3rd grade on, they really ought to be writing. In 3rd grade, you can do a story from the Bible, and they can certainly write a short, 3 sentences on part of the story, and then we could build the story together as a whole class at the board.
We'll now consider how the pictures in a main lesson book can tell a story.
Even in 1st grade, we would be doing a story, and I would say, this story we are going to retell in our main lesson book, and we're going to do it in 5 pictures. What's the first picture? And we would build what the pictures should be in sequence that would tell the whole long fairy tale. So this is 2nd semester of 1st grade. We would start writing words, few words, 4 words, 5 words. The miller sat by the brook. Boom. 2nd grade, I was already expecting that I could tell a tale, I could tell a St. Francis story, and they could write 1 or 2 sentences all by themselves.
Next, let's think about how many main lesson book pages the teacher should expect a student to complete during a main lesson block.
It's just interesting to see in other locations how much gets put into a main lesson book, and are we expecting too much? I'm not saying anything's right or wrong. I think it is a good research question. Natasha has brought up, I think, a really important point is what are our expectations for quality in the books? So if it's going to be in the book, that there is a certain expectation for the quality of the artwork or the writing, as opposed to what would happen in a free art period where they were allowed to draw what they wanted. And this is also something that is in pre-planning for the teachers. And she also mentioned this need for having the children identify what's the most important element that's going to be on my page.
Here are some tips for working with the student who is a perfectionist.
There will be that melancholic child who has 1 line on the page and it's not exactly where they want it to be. I need to start this over. I need a new page. Can't we rip this out? And this idea of ripping pages out of a book, I would stress you absolutely would never do right in front of a child. There's a very destructive feeling about that. But this not only coupling the expectation, the sense of beauty, the sense of wanting to do our best work, but is how can we shift what you've done so that it does meet what you want? Often, if we're doing anything, probably not so much in 1st grade, but in other grades, we used yellow a lot. Even up through 8th grade, start your thing out with a yellow pencil, just to, if you really feel you need to sketch something into a position, you're not going to see the yellow ever. This is why we don't want to be doing line drawings in our books. If you're using this soft, gentle side of a crayon on or pencil, it's much easier to adjust and fix. So I think that over the course of their 8 years, they should know how to fix a mistake they've made without needing to take a page out and totally redo it. There are ways to adjust. Jamie was just saying that there is, as the children get older, if they have not discovered this way of working with errors in their own work, that they can become paralyzed by their perfectionism, and that really hinders their work. But also, on the other hand, you need to know what project you're working on and the level of expertise or perfection that you're requiring for it. And there are places where you are not expecting, you want good, solid, clean, neat work, but simple. So this skill of being able to do that very good work, neat, tidy, lined up work, but to do it in a reasonable, very short period of time is a skill that will benefit them throughout their lives then.
Now we'll hear some thoughts about the orientation of the main lesson book page.
In the early grades, we write it with our finger. So we start at the edge of the page, and we would write it with our finger the way we would normally write it. And then we see how much space is left over on our paper. We did not center things in grade 1, but in grade 2, I would already begin saying, we're going to try to put this in the center of the top. So if you now have this much, put your fingers to half of that and move your half over to the beginning. All right, and you can put a little tick mark, and that's where you'll begin writing your word. You could say, when you come to a hand's width near the end of your page, of your line, put your hand down. If you've got that much left, see if your next word will fit, or if you should take it down to the next line. So it's just an awareness building.
That's the end of Module 25.